to come to our house and spend the night and get bucked off a horse. And, not all good things, but they went very, very well. Kelly and Art and all of you with the Greene County Democratic Committee and all of the folks that are here tonight, thank you for letting me have a chance to talk to you. There's in fact, before I go further, I have a little personal privilege too, and I'd really be in trouble if I didn't do this after the things that Clint said about Janice. But my wife Pat, that Clint talked about, is sitting over here at the table. Patty, stand up. She can't talk to you tonight because she's got a frog in her throat that's about this big, but she was a trooper and she came along tonight. One of our daughters, Melissa, and her husband Greg, and granddaughter Maddie are here with us, sitting at the table. And son Mike sitting over at the table. And one other personal privilege, I tell you what, folks, I get so frustrated, and this doesn't cost you anything. I hadn't planned to go here, but I get so frustrated with people that are critical of our public school teachers and critical of our police and firemen, our public employees. It was a public education that allowed me to learn enough to be able to stand in front of you all and speak and to learn some things along the way. And part of that public education went beyond Miller High School and went to Southwest Missouri State College at the time, then State University. And I got the privilege tonight, as I came into the room, to have two professors that tried to teach me a little bit along the way. Dr. Wayne Barty is sitting over here on my left. He taught me French and Reformation history. We didn't have much of that in Miller High School, so that was a pretty good challenge for that. And Dr. Bob Beckett is here somewhere.
Yeah, Bob, okay.
Back here, Dr. Beckett tried to teach me how to write and speak and understand the King's English a little bit along the way, and have an appreciation for literature and all those things. And it's very, very nice to be able to stand here and to see you guys. And I appreciate your work, and I appreciate you being Democrats. It's really important. So anyhow, with that, there's a lot of things I'd like to talk to you about tonight, but you don't have time. I'd like to talk to you about the labor movement, and I'm going to just a little bit. And I'd like to talk to you about labor and Democrats, because we've got a strong heritage, folks, that sometimes we forget. When Clint said that you all ought to be supporting organized labor every day, not just because I'm a union member, but it's the truth. You ought to be supporting those workers wherever they're at, whether they're the postal workers, or the school teachers, or the sheet metal workers, or the pipe fitters, or the plumbers, or the Teamsters, or whoever it happens to be. You ought to be supporting those folks along the way. It's important. But I also would like to talk to you about the social injustices that go on in this country, and the economic injustices that go on in this country. We were at a meeting a few weeks ago, and Roger Chappell, that's the president of our local here in town, Roger handed me a note, and it's one that you all probably have saw at various times, or you saw something similar, that talks about the economic disparity in this country. And this particular piece was between chief executive officer pay in this country compared to the average worker, and chief executive officer pay around the world compared to the average worker in those countries. And I'm talking about countries that are modern countries, England and France and Italy and Japan and Germany, countries like that. And in America, the average CEO pay is 475 times greater than the average worker's pay. Those European countries, Japan, average somewhere around 20, 21, 22 times the average worker's pay. And we wonder what's going on in this country as we see wealth move to the top, and we see the middle class shrink, and we see the bottom grow larger and larger. I'd love to spend a long time talking to you about that, about those problems that are going on. But that's what's happened. That's what's happened in the last several years before President Obama was elected, that we were on this turn of giving money to the top and kicking everybody else in the teeth, folks, and it's wrong. That's right. I'm going to talk to you tonight before we finish about how I think that you can help be a part of changing that in this country. When I looked at the theme that you all had tonight about strengthening all the people. And then I got my senior Democrat letter. Where's Jack Embry at? Over here. I got my senior Democrat, because I am one of you. I am 63 going on 64. And the senior Democrat letter came this week, and Jack Embry talked about the good job that we did in 2012, but we couldn't pat ourselves on the back because 2014 was approaching quickly. And this theme of strengthening all of us, I want to talk a little bit tonight about how maybe that we can help turn that around in changing some things that go on in this country. In Missouri, just a minute about labor things in Missouri. Right to work and prevailing wage and paycheck protection, paycheck deception as we call it, are all rearing their heads in Jefferson City. I think they'll all be on the floor of the Missouri House this week. I think they'll all be out of committee and they'll be on the floor this week. And folks, we need you to react to that. There's a sheet on your tables. I only had about enough. I think we got about 3 sheets to each table. That it's got the little Teamster thing on it and says, Missouri citizens, can you afford $5,000 a year or less in money? That's what right to work would eventually do to people in the state of Missouri. Out of the right to work states in this country, the average pay is over $5,000 a year less than what it is in the average non-right to work state. Now, I'm not here to tell you that if right to work was passed in Missouri that that's going to happen tomorrow, because it's not. But over a period of time it will happen. You'll see less wages, you'll see less health care, you'll see less pensions. And because of that, that impact just isn't on the carpenter, or on the electrician, or on the teacher. That impact goes to all of us. Every small business owner gets affected by that. If you take $5,000 a year out of your pocketbook, then the guy that owns the cleaner down the street is going to suffer. And the lady in the small town that runs the restaurant is going to suffer. And the people that run the movie theaters are going to suffer. And the people that's got the car dealerships are going to suffer. Business will be hurt across this state if you take $5,000 out of the pockets of workers in this state. It goes beyond that. It goes to the farmer. I live on a farm in Lawrence County. I couldn't sell calves off of that farm, or the farmers here. I saw Mr. Crichton from Willard here a little bit ago. Cattle prices wouldn't be what they are if workers were making $5,000 a year less because they couldn't buy as much beef as they're able to buy. It would impact farmers. It would impact those of you that are on school boards. I was so happy to hear about our election win over in Ash Grove. But it would affect schools and roads and bridges, because if we make $5,000 a year less, folks, then we pay less taxes. And the infrastructure goes down the tubes. Right to work will kill the state of Missouri, and we don't need to go there. Paycheck deception is simply about trying to shut workers' mouths in the political process. If paycheck deception happens, those of you in the Democratic Party, you will see funding dry up to Democrats. That's what it's all about, folks. It's about shutting up labor, and it's about choking the Democratic Party down to nothing. That's what paycheck deception is about. We can't allow that to happen. And those sheets that are on your tables, on the back side of those sheets, is the name of almost all state representatives, Republican or Democratic, in Southwest Missouri, and state senators. And I encourage you, when you go home tonight, and come Monday, I encourage you that you call that state rep that is your state rep, your state senator, and ask them to vote no on those issues if they come up in the House next week. If they have voices that come to them, you will make a difference about what goes on. So I encourage you about those pieces that you go to work for organized labor and you do it now. It's so very, very important. I spoke to a group up in Hamville a few weeks ago, and I got to speak up there last year, and I reminded them of one of the poems that we all memorized in grade school that Longfellow wrote. And everybody kind of remembers probably the first few lines out of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And the poem went something like this to start out with, and I can't remember all of it, folks, that's the problem. But It went something like this. It says, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere." It was the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive that remembers that famous day and year. And then it went on to tell how Revere told his friend to go to the arch of the Old North Church, and when the British started to move that night, to hang lanterns from the belfry. "One if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, so the country folks can take up their arms." That's why I talk to you about right to work and paycheck deception, folks. I'm not Paul Revere. I'm sure not Longfellow. But I am telling you, the Koch brothers are here. Yeah. And all of their cronies are here with them. You can make a difference. Voting, talking to your family, talking to your neighbors, getting active in your party. I looked at this little program, and the important part is not this part. The important part is on the back. The people that are the volunteers that did all the work for the Greene County Committee and setting up Jackson Day, that helped Kelly every single day. Those are the heroes. Those are people that are making a difference, and I challenge every one of you that you need to make a difference with what goes on, folks. You can make a difference. But sometimes, and I'm going to apologize to a few of you now, because some of you have heard a few of these lines before, but they're important not just because I'm saying them, they're important about the lessons that they teach. Sometimes we think that we can't make a difference. We think, I'm just one, I'm busy, I really don't have time, and it's not going to matter whether I say or do anything or not. And I want to give you a couple of stories that I hope will encourage you, and I hope it'll follow Kelly and the Democrats' theme about strengthening you, about how that you can make a difference. People that were just plain, ordinary people that did incredible things against odds that were unbelievably hard. And I think when you hear about those, then I hope that we'll all be encouraged about doing things going forward. The first one, I'm going to take you back. I will tell you, I'm sure not a biblical scholar, but the first story I want to talk to you about people that made a difference, is one of my favorite little books in the Old Testament, and the name of the book is Nehemiah. And I don't know how many of you read Nehemiah and you're familiar with the scripture. Dr. Olmsted will know what I'm talking about. But Nehemiah was a guy that had been part of the Jewish folks that had been carried away captive. In fact, I think probably Nehemiah wasn't, people before him had been carried away captive. But the Jews had been overrun by Babylon, and they'd been carried away by the Babylonians in what people call the Babylonian captivity. And that went on for a period of years, and then the Persians came along, and the Persians defeated the Babylonians, and Nehemiah wound up working in the palace, and he was the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. And Nehemiah was just a servant. The cupbearer had a pretty dangerous job. It may have been a pretty intimate job. They're the ones that tasted the wine, tasted the food. Is it okay? Is it poison? Is it not poison? But Nehemiah was in that position. He was a servant. And Nehemiah learned about what things were like back in the city of Jerusalem that his people had come from. And the Bible says, when you start reading Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah wept. He had compassion. And he cared about what had gone on in Jerusalem. One man. And Nehemiah went to the king, and he said, "Oh, king, if it would please you, I want to go back to Jerusalem. I want to go see about my people. I want to go see about the city. I want to go see about the welfare there, how things are." And the king allowed Nehemiah to go. And Nehemiah went, and when he got to Jerusalem, the temple had been burned and destroyed. The walls around Jerusalem had been destroyed. 12 gates around the city had been destroyed. And Nehemiah said, "I want to rebuild Jerusalem. site. That's pretty good help. But one man, because it takes a person to move. And Nehemiah gathered some friends around him, and he said, let's rebuild the walls of the city. Let's rebuild the temple. And Nehemiah talks about rebuilding the walls. Ezra had done temple rebuilding. But Nehemiah talks about rebuilding the walls. And what Nehemiah did was he picked people, asked for volunteers, like the heroes on this list. He asked for volunteers to take up segments of the work. And he got the table in the back corner and said, I want you to go over between these two gates and go to work on the wall. And then he got the table back here, and he said, I want you to get the next segment. And then he got Jack Hembry's table and said, I want you to get the next segment. And then he got Craig and Andy Hosmer's table and says, I want you to get the next segment. And it went on and on and on as they put people into place. When they started to rebuild the walls, it started with one man, it multiplied to multiple people, it multiplied to lots of groups. But folks, it's just like maybe a work project that the carpenters are doing one thing and the electricians are doing something and the plumbers are doing something. The Teamsters get pretty easy. We just haul stuff in and out. But it's assigning the work to people asking for volunteers. And they ran into opposition. They ran into a couple of guys. One of them's name was Sanballat and one of them's name was Tobiah, I think. They ran into opposition, kind of like we've got Hannity and Limbaugh and a few folks like that. But they ran into opposition, but they persevered. And you know what, folks? Starting out with one man, in less than 2 months, the book of Nehemiah says the walls were rebuilt in less than 2 months. But it started with one. Odds that were huge. And the reason I talk about odds a little bit is because it's not really easy always to be a Democrat in Southwest Missouri. I understand what the odds are like. We just lost Charlie Dake's election in Lawrence County. And by the way, all of you from Greene County that helped with Charlie Dake, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We lost, but we ain't going to quit, folks. We've got to keep moving forward. We've got to keep trying to elect people that will represent us in our state government, our local government, and so on. But Nehemiah was one man, and he multiplied to others, and he made a difference. Folks, you can do the same kind of thing, and I challenge you that you begin to think tonight about 2014 and what you can do starting tonight and tomorrow and Monday and going forward to help make a difference. That was about 2,400 years ago. Now I want to move you forward to 60 years ago. And it's Thursday night, December the 1st, 1955. And you're in Montgomery, Alabama. And it's the end of the workday on Thursday. And a lady by the name of Rosa Parks got off work and she was tired. And she went to get on the bus to go home. Montgomery had a segregated bus system. Rosa Parks chose to sit down among the first 4 seats of the bus because those were saved for whites. A little bit like Jack was talking about Central High School and Lincoln High School a little earlier tonight. And Rosa Parks sat down and the bus driver told her to get up and move, and Rosa Parks refused to get up and move. And he asked her again, and Rosa Parks refused to get up and move. And they pulled Rosa Parks off of that bus and had her arrested. One person, one woman in this case, that stood up to start to make a difference. They took her to jail, arrested her, booked her, and she called a friend of hers. The guy she called is a man by the name of E.D. Nixon. Nixon was a Pullman porter, a union man. That's a good thing. She called E.D. Nixon. E.D. also happened to be head of the NAACP in Montgomery. Montgomery had about 50,000 blacks living in the city at that time in 1955. But Rosa Parks called one man. Started with one woman, she called one man. E.D. Nixon went down and bailed her out of jail on Thursday night on December the 1st. Nixon was infuriated. Rosa Parks was not a happy lady either. The next morning, E.D. Nixon called a couple of friends. One by the name of Martin Luther King. And he called Dr. King, told him what had happened the night before, and he said, we've got to change things in Montgomery. We've had enough. It's time that we take a stand. He also called a guy by the name of Ralph Abernathy that was pastor of another church. And there's a point maybe to that Rosa called E.D. Nixon, but the first two people E.D. Nixon called were a couple of pastors. Now, folks, I will tell you, and I'll be careful what I say, but I'll tell you what I think. I think the church has lost its way a lot of what's going on in this country now. We've forgotten about social issues, about really caring for people. I don't have any fault with anybody that wants to protect a life that believes that abortion is wrong. But I do have fault when they don't want to protect and take care of people's lives after they're born.
That's right.
That was free too. That didn't cost anything. But E.D. Nixon called Dr. King and called Dr. Abernathy. And E.D. Nixon said, we need to boycott the bus system. And I don't know how many of you saw a movie a couple, 2 or 3 years ago called The Help. If you didn't see that movie or you didn't read that book, you need to go get the book or go check out the movie and watch it. But The Help is about a group of black domestic workers in a city like Montgomery during the time frame that I'm talking about. And it's an inspiring movie. It'll make you cry, it'll make you mad, it'll make you happy. But it's a great movie. But that day, on Friday, December the 2nd, Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy, E.D. Nixon started to call people. They decided on that Friday night to call a meeting of church and civic leaders. And they met together on that Friday night, somewhere over 40 people. So now we went from 1 to 2 to 3, 4, now we're at somewhere above 40 people that attended that meeting in a church on Friday night in Montgomery, Alabama. And they decided that they could make a difference. And they decided to go forward. That night they ran off on an old mimeograph machine, 7,000 flyers that called for a mass meeting to be held at the Holt Street Baptist Church on Monday night, December the 5th. Those 7,000 flyers got run off late Friday night. On Saturday morning, the 3rd day of December, there were literally hundreds of women and children and teenagers and men that fanned out across the city of Montgomery, spreading those flyers about come to a meeting on Monday night. Boycott the bus system. Nobody ride the bus system. And those 50,000 blacks that lived in Montgomery, there weren't lots of them that had cars, folks. Most of them rode the bus to get to work. That was a huge call on them to say, find a different way of transportation on Monday morning and then come to a meeting on Monday night. But the word spread from that Saturday. It spread through the churches on Sunday. And on Monday morning, when the boycott was supposed to start, Dr. King says that he and Coretta got up about 5:30 that morning, made coffee. Dr. King says, I was in the kitchen, and he said the first buses were supposed to start rolling at 6 a.m. Buses rolled every 15 minutes throughout the city. There was a bus stop just outside their house, 10 feet away from the house. And at 6 o'clock, Dr. King says, Coretta called and said, Martin, come quickly. And Martin went into the living room and they looked out the window and the first bus approached the bus stop at 6 a.m. and the bus was empty. And they waited for the second bus, 6:15, and the bus was empty. The third bus came at 6:30. At 6:30, there were 2 white men on the bus. Dr. King says, I got in my car and I drove around the city of Montgomery, and as I drove around, the buses were empty all over the city. Before the boycott started, Dr. King had thought, if we get 60% of the people to stop, we'll be lucky. They wound up with almost 100% of the people that boycotted the buses. That night, when they met at the Holt Street Baptist Church, Dr. King said, when I got within 5 blocks of the church, I could no longer move in traffic because traffic was blocked all around the church in every direction. Took him 15 minutes to walk to the church to get in. And there were thousands and thousands of people that came to the Holt Street Baptist Church that night. When they started out, they didn't know how things would be. 50,000 black people in Alabama, in Montgomery, didn't ride the bus. But folks, that was just the start. Because the next day was another work day, and the next day, and the next day. And these folks maintained that boycott for a year. It was November of 1956, 11 months later, that the United States Supreme Court declared that segregating busing was unconstitutional. The boycott was called off. Yes, that's worth clapping for. The boycott was called off, and in December of 1956, Dr. King got on that first segregated bus that moved in the city of Montgomery. Now, folks, if I ever want to talk to labor people about how do you organize people, you look to Dr. King and Mr. Abernathy. You look at E.D. Nixon and Rosa Parks. They started with 1, they went to 2, they went to 3, they went to 4. You look to Nehemiah. How do you rebuild a city that's been torn down? And Nehemiah pulled groups together that believed in a common cause about making things better in Jerusalem. Folks, you can make a difference. 1 at a time, going to 2, going to 3, going to 4, going to 40, going to hundreds, going to thousands. You can make a difference. The challenges they faced, far greater than what we face in Southwest Missouri, folks. No doubt about it. Didn't slow them down any. They moved forward. Now, I don't memorize quotes very well, so I want to read to you. And we're back to Monday night, December the 5th, at the Holt Street Baptist Church, at the conclusion of the meeting. And Dr. King had this to say. He says, you know, my friends, there comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over. We are not wrong in what we do, but in all of our actions, we must stick together. And as we prepare ourselves to what lies ahead, let us go out with a grim and bold determination that we are going to stick together, that we are going to work together. My question to you, as Democrats in Southwest Missouri, are you ready? If you are, let's go to work. Thank you.